way commodities speak among themselves, as it were. We can go here even a step further. My Slovene Lacanian party member, colleague Alenka Zupancic, did this in a book which will appear soon on Hegel and comedy. We can repeat the same story, now I come to my central point of chicken and so on, about God, apropos God himself. Let's imagine a society of enlightened revolutionary terror, where a man is put in prison because he believes in God, with different measures, with kind of ideological brainwashing and so on. He is brought to knowledge that God does not exist. They convince him. Then he is dismissed, but then soon he comes running back and he explains that he is scared of being punished by God. Then the teacher, terrorist teacher, tells him, but what's the problem? We cured you. You know that God doesn't exist. Of course. What's the reply? You can guess it. I know it, but does God know it, that he doesn't exist? Now you will say, I'm joking here. I'm not. Let me now give you my final point. This is why my attachment to Christian legacy, and I speak here as an atheist, it's so passionate. I follow here my preferred Catholic theologist, Gilbert Keith Chesterton, who claimed that precisely and only in Christianity God does know this. At the moment of Father, Father, you know, on the cross, why did you forsake me? Here is a wonderful quote from Chesterton's Orthodoxy. Quote, when the world shook and the sun was wiped out of heaven, it was not at the crucifixion, but at the cry from the cross, the cry which confessed that God was forsaken of God. And now let the revolutionaries choose a creed from all the creeds and a God from all the gods of the world, carefully weighing all the gods of inevitable recurrence and of unalterable power. They will not find another God who has himself been in revolt. No, the matter grows too difficult for human speech, but let the atheists themselves choose a God. They will find only one divinity who ever uttered their isolation. Only one religion in which God seemed for an instant to be an atheist. That's the unique element of Christianity for Chesterton. If we take seriously that, Father, why have you forsaken me, and so on, it's not simply men are abandoned by God and so on. It's God himself is for a moment abandoned by God. That is to say, the gap between man and God is, as it were, reflected into God himself. And that's the difficult thing to accept, which is why I think that Christianity in this sense is much closer to this kind of atheist position than the standard atheism, which is that of all my friends, the culture atheism, which is, of course, this using the cultural reference. All my Jewish friends say, I ask them, why don't you eat this good pork sausage? You know, I don't believe it, but, you know, it's part of my cultural inheritance and so on and so on. You know, like, you don't do it out of belief. You say, I just follow the traditions, the rituals, and so on and so on. Another way you can detect this, how should I call it, discentered or whatever, discentered belief which socially functions, even when you deny it, would be through displacing this belief onto another. It's incredible how often people are ready, not a problem for them not to believe, but you need to have another people whom you suppose he believes. And that the critical moment is not for you to discover that you don't believe, but to discover that this other who, as it were, believed for you does not believe. And I'm not here making fun. I mean, this can get extremely serious. For example, maybe you heard about her. She was teaching for some time at New School. She's still there, Agnes Heller, the Hungarian Lukács people. She told me a wonderful story. Okay, wonderful. I mean, theoretically wonderful. In reality, terrifying. When she was in Auschwitz. She has the numbers and so on. She told me that how there, in every cell, every building, there was a myth. You know, most of the people there, the majority of the people were, let's call them survivalists. Totally shattered. You only focused on your survival. You followed certain rules but within these rules you could steal for others and so on. When you lose even this survivalist attitude, you regress to the level of so-called Muslims, the living dead. You simply didn't care. But nonetheless, she told me, in every barrack, there was a myth, a belief that never in your barrack, but in the nearby barrack, there was somebody who was not simply only keen on his or her survival, somebody who still remained, even in these horrible circumstances, an ethical person, sacrificed himself, helped others, and so on and so on. And then she told me something interesting, that the most dangerous moment was when you discovered, as unfortunately you almost always did, that this other doesn't exist, that it's a myth. Like you, in some work group, you meet this other and you discover that he's like us, just a survivalist. At that point, usually you broke down, you regressed to the level of Musulman, ironically, they were called Muslims. This is, okay, Western racism. You know why? Because in the Western imaginary of the early 20th century, Muslims were supposed to be these people totally abandoning themselves in faith, just obeying destiny. You just prayed and accept everything. And these people who were totally broken, the living dead, they just did like this, they didn't even act. So ironically, nice case of practical racism, they were called Muslims. So, but the interesting point is that you got my point, that even in order to be a cruel survivalist, you needed another guy to be, as it were, good for you. You needed to believe, I may be evil, egotist, because another one is good for me, as it were. If you needed that even to support your egotist attitude. And it's incredible how often you find this at different levels. For example, I read an interesting research recently about sexual promiscuity, how most of the people who engage in orgies and so on, they can be extremely wild, doing I don't know what, but usually, nonetheless, they always have another one who, as it were, has to remain pure for them. It's usually their children or their, like, I can do with triple penetration, name it, whatever, but don't touch my son, or but don't touch my mother. There is somebody else who has to remain pure. So let me go on here. How then? What's the structure here? The structure of this objectified belief. That's my lesson here. How beliefs today, more than ever, precisely in our cynical, post-ideological, blah, blah, blah era, how beliefs are objectified. You can, as it were, believe without believing. You just practice belief with your acts. There is a wonderful anecdote, maybe known to some of you, about Niels Bohr, you know, the Copenhagen, the guy, who I think was very intelligent, also in theological matters. You know that I think that he provided a perfect answer to your own guy here, Princeton, Einstein. No, you know the famous, God doesn't play dice. But you know what Niels Bohr's answer to Einstein was? Don't tell God what to do. No, I think it's correct. Okay, there is another, I think even much better anecdote about Niels Bohr. A friend visited him in a countryside house and saw, it was an old farmer house, saw above the entrance the horseshoe on the entrance door. I don't know if it's here also, but in Europe this is kind of a superstitious object, like it brings luck. No, if you have a horseshoe. Okay, so the surprised visitor asked Niels Bohr, why do you have that? My God, I thought you were a scientist. Do you really believe in this? You know, Niels Bohr gave a perfect answer. Of course, I'm not an idiot. Of course, I do not believe in it. But I have it because I was told that it works also if you don't believe in it. That's how it works today. We don't believe it, but it works even if you don't believe it. No. In other words, this brings us back to my big theological reference, this notion of objectified beliefs, to Pascal. I think that Pascal, you know this Pascalian slogan, interpreted endlessly by almost all French, but it is as if the entire French Marxism is a version of Pascalian theology. You know, the Pascalian famous, like Pascal is basically the first theorist of Alcoholics Anonymous, this fake it till you make it. That is to say, you don't believe, no problem. Do as if you believe, kneel down, pray, and belief will come by itself. But I think that from today's experience, we should turn around Pascal. It's more complex. The logic is not kneel down and you will believe, but kneel down and you will make another belief, another agency or whatever, believe for you. That is to say, one can say that